game. But
Good evening and welcome into Blues Hub, the post-game show. The Blues Hub post-game show is presented by Hot Shots, St. Louis's home for all the games, all the time since 1990. Find yours at hotshotsnet.com. I'm your host, Ethan Hannaford. I am joined tonight by Lindenwood sports broadcaster Jacob Stanoch. And Jacob, tonight, to put it politely, an absolute beatdown. Anytime that you can say that your team ends up putting a touchdown in the back of the net in hockey, it is a polite night on the ice, and things are rolling right now for the Blues. I'd love to hear just your initial thoughts from tonight's game.
I think the best way to put it, it was arguably one of the most complete games. Obviously, put the third period behind. I mean, you go up 7-1 in that, or 7-0 at one point in that third period. Obviously, you're going to let up off the gas. But those first two periods were two of the most complete periods I've seen the Blues play all season, and that opening period especially. It took them a little bit to get the wheels going. They looked like they were trying to utilize more of an offensive start than a defensive start in that first, unlike Sunday where they just wore down Colorado with that incredibly physical start. But it looked like tonight it was complete opposite. They started offensively, had an incredible offensive pressure, and it gave them a multitude of offensive chances from the get-go. And just from that, it really looked like that's what wore down the Kraken initially. And it really showed in that second period with just that onslaught where, they scored 4 goals, but it felt like it could have been a lot more than that, especially with a lot of opportunities. And I think the best way to put it, take away that third period, which will happen, like I said, with a 7-goal lead. That was pretty much a Blues fan's dream night tonight with the amount of streaks that got snapped. Bolduc getting 2 goals on his birthday of all days. Fowler continuing to just be insane with the Blues so far, which has been my biggest shock of the season, is how well Fowler's been doing so far. And he just continues 2 assists and a goal as well. Just that seeing eye shot, that was a beauty. Could have been 8. Not sure if that last one was a goal or not. Personally, I think he was high sticked, which I think should negate the goaltender interference a bit. And I don't know if he really shoved them in, but I digress. They still scored 7 goals, and it was 4 or 5 of those were complete team goals, which is something you haven't seen from the Blues in a while. Especially showed on that Neighbors goal, which was just such an incredible passing play. One of the best I've seen from any team all season. Just an unreal team goal. And it started from that first and continued on. And certainly happy to see that come from the team tonight.
Yeah, there's a lot to be excited about as far as the play here in the recent games. I think even dating back to what we saw in bits and pieces from the game against Winnipeg on Saturday night. And then that was most definitely continued on Sunday against Colorado. But it feels like I don't want to say an icing on the cake because you want it to continue. But as far as these last 3 games, it really has been that sort of icing on the cake. We know that going into tonight's game, Jim Montgomery had been preaching consistency. Can we see this Blues team finally get into a stretch, a routine of consistent good hockey? We know that there are individual pieces on this team that have the ability to do so, but we haven't been able to see specifically the top 6 be able to put all 6 of them solid time on the ice in the same game on a consistent routine basis. And it finally seems like we've started to get that from the top six. Not to mention, you mentioned Cam Fowler tonight. I was extremely impressed with him. The defense was so involved in the offensive game, and I thought that was something that we saw, especially early in the game. Jacob really felt like it got things going about halfway through the first period on that Cairo goal. We saw them win that faceoff where it went to Cam Fowler. He passed it to Parayko in the neutral zone, got it back quickly, and once he gave it off to Jordan Kyrou, who had that sick toe drag move there also. But once he did, he carried that defender with him, that defenseman, pardon, wrong sport. But he carried him with him, and that opened up the opportunity. When you give Jordan Kyrou that type of open space in that area of the ice, he's going to finish more times than not. And that was a great example, I think, of just the pace of play that things have, the direction of that things have been moving for this Blues team. Not to mention Jordan Kyrou, his 8th goal in 10 games against Seattle, 3 goals now in 2 games this season. This the last time that the Blues will face off against the Kraken, unfortunately, because both of them have gone well, the last time being on opening night. And then Jordan Kyrou drawing the penalty against Tolvanen later in that period. Oscar Sundqvist quickly scoring to put the Blues up 2-0. A great, nice, quick, efficient power play. 4 of their last 10, I believe, on the man advantage from that point on, up to that point. And now Sonny, 3 of his 5 goals this season on the power play. So clearly something working for him on the man advantage. And you had to feel good going into that first intermission if you are St. Louis, up 2-0. But it wasn't just the score. It was the pace of play. It was being out shooting Seattle at that point, 14-4. And we were talking about it earlier, just texting back and forth, Jacob, and we both said arguably the best first period we've seen from the Blues this season.
Yeah, I mean, overall, and it started kind of, to me, obviously, it seemed like it was a little bit of a slow start, and I think it was just that mental switch between the Colorado game and tonight. Seattle's a completely different team than Colorado, and in the literal definition of completely different team. They like to play vastly different. They like to move the puck, and they like to utilize that stretch pass, something that they mentioned earlier on FanDuel Sports was trying to knock down that stretch pass. And they said that early on in the first. And ever since, once they said that, it never came up again. It didn't even seem like a part of the game because the Blues cracked down on it so well defensively. But in that first period, it started right after that Kyrou goal. And after that, it was the offensive pressure, and every single goal, it was face off down, and immediately they were already back in the offensive zone. And even if they didn't have the puck cleanly, they were already pressuring. They were already pushing it back in to the Seattle end. And that was some of the best offensive pressure I've seen tonight. And I think that's something that Jim Montgomery is certainly wanting to see from his team, is the more pressure offensively while also not, leaving the defense out to dry. And that was something they executed perfectly on tonight. And then they just contributed that to getting plays open, getting players open, getting opportunities in front of the net. The biggest one, obviously, Sonny on that power play right in front of the net, wide open look, and just the movement of the puck as well. Overall, that first period was just to a T perfection for the Blues, especially in that last 15 minutes after Kyrou had just that beauty of a goal. And like you said, you give him that kind of space, there's almost no doubt he's scoring that goal. And the line combinations, they have slowly come in and out, but right now I think it's really working with him with Holloway and Shen, and that connection has just been fantastic.
If you are joining us on the live stream right now, be sure to throw those comments in the chat. We want to hear your guys' thoughts on the Blues beatdown tonight of Seattle. Like I mentioned, I wish we could play Seattle every night after a game like this. Andrew saying, not going to lie, that was a bad goalie interference call on the Blues in the third. Yes, actually, I thought that both goal calls at one point, of course, the Seattle one got overturned, but originally that one was called a no goal. I couldn't believe that one was either. If this was a tight game, I think that is the talk of the town tonight in St. Louis, which is saying something considering we had a spring training game today. Mizzou played, Blue played, but regardless, I think that wasn't nearly There wasn't nearly as much attention because of what the score was at that point. But I thought it was funny. The Blues arguably had their 8th goal in the bag at one point, but it was overturned because of a goalie interference. They said that Torpchenko ran into the backup goalie for Seattle. Debatable. I mean, he got high-sticked. But like I said, at that point, it is what it is. I think if Jim Montgomery reviews that, it's probably getting overturned. But little sportsmanship there. There's no point. There's no point at that point in the game. Definitely a fair point made there by Andrew. Please, we appreciate you guys keeping up in the chat, and feel free to throw those thoughts in there as well. Betsy, what are the keys to keeping this momentum and building off of this? That's a great question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Jacob, because clearly what the Blues have going right now is positive momentum. The first time under Jim Montgomery since he took over for Drew Bannister earlier in the season that the Blues have come away with points in 4 straight games, and of course the last 2 being in wins, and one of those being before the break from the Four Nations face-off. But I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as to what St. Louis needs to do to kind of start building this momentum in the right direction, because the last thing I'll say, it's a weird time of year. With the trade deadline looming, I believe only 4 games now until then, you don't really know who your teammates are going to be here down the stretch. So I'm going to be curious as to, if that affects the play at all. We know St. Louis traditionally not a team that's used to selling at the deadline, and there's been a lot of noise around that at this deadline. But is there a world where the Blues can get hot and all of a sudden potentially change Doug Armstrong's mind? But perhaps that's the next question. But regardless, the Blues can only control who's on the ice and how they play. Any thoughts as to Betsy's question here, Jacob?
I think the biggest thing for them right now is just continue to really play their game. I think in a spot like this, when you're at right now, a lot of people kind of want to take that one game at a time, and certainly do agree with that. But you're going in, obviously, first game on the road. You got first game on the road after the break, and you got the Capitals, a fantastic team, and they are leading their division right now, if I am not wrong. Yeah, they are leading in the Metro, 84 points this year. They are a tough team, and obviously Ovi on that scoring chase, which is just incredible. And I think the biggest thing for them is obviously take it one by one, but at the same time, you kind of have to string these games together almost like you're playing an entire straight week of one game that's 9-12 periods long. And right now, I mean, you see it kind of the carryover. You see the switch to how it was against Colorado in the lineup, just those subtle changes. And then they run the same thing that they do against Colorado tonight. And it kind of showed that they had that same mentality, just switching it up a little bit. So I think the biggest thing kind of just to keep it going is just kind of staying in that mindset of almost just kind of going that period by period, that all these games are just pretty much one massive game throughout, especially throughout this week, which is a big week coming off of the break, possibly even trying to poise yourself for a maybe playoff run before the trade deadline. Like you said, trying to change some minds of the front office of who goes and who doesn't, if anyone goes at all, which obviously is going to be another big question over St. Louisans' heads, because we all know how St. Louis sports likes to do their trading. I have my own gripes with that. But anyway, just kind of like the biggest thing, obviously, the mental side of hockey is just continuing to just think of playing your game. And I've always been a biggest believer of, and I don't know what the difference is between the college level and the NCAA or the big show. I mean, college level, you see it all the time. You get guys who get a big win. We saw this with Lindenwood a lot this season. They get a big win and they think, oh, now we're this big, tough team. We think we can contend with anyone. And then they kind of let off the gas a bit, and then they end up dropping and not just losing a game, but losing relatively big. We saw it a lot with Lindenwood this season. So kind of like that mentality with the Blues is just every game is just, you're basically playing the same team every single time. And you can't let up and think of any team differently. And I think we saw that tonight with Seattle too, playing that style against Colorado and because of that, Colorado, much better team than Seattle is. And they just had that offensive onslaught tonight, which we have not seen since December. Their most goals since December, which was came against the Preds. But just that mentality stayed the same. I think throughout these couple games following that Winnipeg game, and if they continuing playing this pretty much one big game, I think that can get them some big wins down this short stretch.
Andrew mentioning that the Blues, if they are to win these upcoming couple of games here, he is wondering how exactly you can be a seller at the trade deadline. And that's a fair question. I think that with context, the Blues now with the win tonight, 3 points out of a wild card spot. And to be quite frank, there's no reason as to why this team should be in the playoff mix with how some of their play was down the stretch to finish up the first half of play. But they find themselves in this situation now where they are playing hot. And we saw this team in a semi-similar situation a couple of years ago before they traded Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly, where they won 3 games in a row right before trading both of those guys. You kind of wondered, well, is there a chance that this team could potentially make some noise and get in the mix here, and maybe they don't sell? So, it's hard to get a beat on Doug Armstrong because we know that he's going to want to see it for more than 3 games. And in that season, the writing was on the wall. He mentioned how he knew what this team was. The question that I'm going to be curious that we'll have to wait and see is, Doug Armstrong, is he just as sure of what he has in this team as he was a couple of seasons ago? We know that he has mentioned they want to chip further up the roster here. That happened just a few weeks ago when they put Brandon Saad on waivers. And so that's going to be an interesting question, I think, as far as just continuing to build momentum. I've loved what we've seen from their star players here these last couple of games. Robert Thomas now is on a 7-game point streak. And in that time, I believe he has 11 points and 4 goals. I think he's scored in his last 4. Jordan Kyrou has gotten in on the action as well. In large part, those are a couple of guys that have had, I guess more so, I would say Thomas than Kyrou, but have had semi-quiet seasons for themselves. And you can throw Pavel Buchnevich in there as well. He got in on the mix tonight. I think that if you can get your star players going, then you can definitely perhaps get in the mix here. I think one final thing just about tonight's game specifically, something that impressed me so much was not the play in the first period, which was very good, but it was the way that they came out in the second period, because there was a little bit of pressure to start off the second period. You had a feeling that was going to happen. I mean, Seattle has some talent on that roster, and I'm sure that they probably got lit up a little bit in the first intermission by the coaching staff. You had a feeling they were going to come out with a little bit of fire, and they did. I think they put out about 8 shots in the first 3.5 minutes. But Jordan Binnington did well. They drew that penalty. The Blues were able to withstand, and then they responded right away, and they scored that 3rd goal. And it kind of, for me, felt like that was the turning point in this one. Of course, Zach Bolduc then had the 4th birthday goal. Turned 22 yesterday, so happy birthday to Zach Bolduc, who was the player of the game tonight. Loved what we saw from him as well. But I think going back to just that initial question we've kind of been discussing a little bit, if the Blues can get this same turnout, the same play from their star players, and you're not going to, for Doug Armstrong, you're not going to put anything in concrete as to like what these players are in a 6-game strand. I think that you could say this is what this team can be, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be enough for him to still not sell. I don't think there's a world where Doug Armstrong is buying at this point. The expectation for this Blues team going in to the season was that they were going to be trying to be in the mix to make a playoff, get into the playoffs, and then with good goaltending, who knows what can happen. I don't think that there's just way too much talent down the line for this team, way too much young talent to be able to sell and to give any of that away for this year's success. That doesn't mean that this team couldn't make things interesting if they are to squeeze in, and you have a red-hot Jordan Binnington who stands on his head like he did during the Four Nations face-off. But I don't think that I expect this team to be adding any big pieces. With that being said, I would be really surprised. There's been some rumors about could Jordan Binnington be in the mix with his value being raised based off his performance in the Four Nations faceoff. The same with Colton Parayko. I would be really surprised if we see Doug Armstrong make that splashy move, but that doesn't mean that a guy like Braden Shen, who's been in the mix, isn't getting shopped, that there couldn't be some discussion going on. I just don't know if I see it being specifically a Binnington or a Parayko, because I think in their eyes, they see these guys as players that can still be a part of the transition into this youth core that they have these next couple of years. And I think that if they continue to play well down the stretch here into next year, perhaps you make, Snuggerud comes up at the end of this year and you have him for a full year next year. Bolduc and Neighbors have a full season. Perhaps things are a little bit more interesting next year.
I mean, yeah, I completely agree. And kind of just looking at it, like if my thought right now is if they keep winning or I shouldn't say keep winning, but if they do well down this stretch coming up, going into the trade deadline, I don't know if I can see anything being moved. I mean, you look at a game like tonight, there wasn't anything that really stuck out of we need to fill in. It kind of said the same thing against Colorado. It didn't really seem like there's anything that was, looking to fill in, anything that seemed missing. Obviously, there's the question, always the question on defense. There's some guys under contract that only got a year or so left that, are probably willing to get rid of those contracts, and so that way they can make space for some upcoming guys like Snuggerud, who I think will be fantastic also because he's with the Gophers. So I have a little bit of bias towards that. But I mean, the Binnington one, as a sentimentalist in sports, I could never see him leaving for at least anytime soon, purely because he's essentially your face of the franchise at the moment. I don't think there's any way you can really make that move. And I think that was, to me, that's also kind of another reason, kind of going off that Arenado deal with it. He's kind of one of their only faces left for the Cardinals. But to look at the Blues, you still got a handful of faces left, but Benner's probably your biggest one. And yeah, did his value skyrocket after the Four Nations? Unless some team's willing to give up a lot and a star-studded goalie that is even better than Hofer, I really don't see anything coming their way for Benner. But in terms of players like Buchnevich, it's always a maybe. It's maybe always a maybe on Shen. Even though, I mean, honestly, he's your captain. He's your guy who's the glue in the locker room as the captain. He's your leader. And I love the way Shenner plays because he's not just an offensive player. He's all over the ice. He's a gritty player. He really does it all. So yeah, I mean, personally, if I see it coming, if I see, they continue to do well down the stretch, I don't really know if there's much they do. And I don't think they would be selling. It's just a question of how does it look at that point as the team, what the goal is for the rest of the season. That will kind of decide it.
Well, there's definitely some interesting hockey to be played here, especially in the next couple of games leading up to the trade deadline. And regardless, the Blues putting together two very impressive wins on Sunday against Colorado, and then tonight against Seattle, a 7-2 victory. And coming up on Thursday night, be sure to join us for the Sports Hub STL kickoff party at the new Hot Shots on Lindbergh in LeMay. Come meet the team, enjoy great food, drink specials. The party starts at 6 as the Blues game will be beginning at that time in Washington. And as you mentioned, Alex Ovechkin on goal record watch. So this is one you're not going to want to miss. We'll be watching the game. We're going to have some great prize giveaways as well. And the Blues Hub post-game show will be live after the game. And hey, two lucky Blues fans that night and a few of their friends will win the very first Sports Hub STL sports experience, which will include watching a Blues road game at a private party with Blues alums, Sports Hub, STL staff, and more. So if you want a chance to win, come out to the Sports Hub STL kickoff party this Thursday night at the new Hot Shots on Lindbergh in LeMay. Hot Shots, St. Louis's home for all the games, all the time since 1990. Find yours at hotshotsnet.com. blueshub.com. Jacob, thank you so much for joining me for Blues Hub post game tonight. Blues winners in this one. Looking forward to seeing what the upcoming stretch here for the Blues holds.
Yeah, it should be good.
Thank you guys for joining in tonight. We appreciate it, and we'll see you on Thursday.